Hey, what's going on, guys? At UFC 297, we learned a lot about all the different fighters on the card, and this is going to be my top 3 takeaways from UFC 297. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to get into my actual list, going from 3 to 1. 1 being my most important takeaway from UFC 297. Starting off with my first honorable mention, and that is that Mike Malott is an absolute fraud. He gets finished via TKO in the third round against Neil Magny. Neil Magny is basically a punching bag at this point. He's a step away from a dead body at this point. And the UFC gave Mike Malott the most optimal scenario because they're trying to build MMA up in Canada again. And they gave Malott a featured fight on a pay-per-view main card against a very winnable matchup that's in the top 15 in Neil Magny. And Mike Malott goes out there and completely fumbles it. Wins the first and second rounds, winning the third round, but completely exhausted, even though his output wasn't anything like, oh my God, Mike Malott tried to finish him badly. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was winning the fight pretty clearly, but it's not like he gassed himself out looking for a finish. He completely gasses out and gets finished badly in the third round. At that point, he should have probably taken off the tape around his gloves, took off his gloves and retired in the cage because he's already 32 years old. This was the biggest test of his career. He's coming off a win over Adam Fugit in his last fight before this, and he gets TKO'd by Neil Magny. Complete embarrassing performance. One of the worst losses I've ever seen, just in when you really put it in context that the UFC was really trying to build him up and build up Canadian MMA and give him this main card spot. And he goes out there against Neil Magny and gets finished. Neil Magny, who's been a gatekeeper of the top 15, who's on the tail end of his career, who probably doesn't have that many more fights left in him, goes out there and finishes Mike Malott. So Mike Malott's a fraud. I don't think he'll ever be in the top 15 of the UFC welterweight rankings. And I think the UFC will try to have to find another Canadian prospect to build up. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is that Movsar Evloev may be the number 1 contender. He should be the number 1 contender if Alexander Volkanovski defeats Ilia Topuria at UFC 298. If that happens, okay, Volkanovski beats Ilia Topuria, we don't have a lot of contenders. You know, there's a lot of fights that Volkanovski either already fought or they're coming off losses. There's really, if Volkanovski beats Topuria, now if Topuria beats Volkanovski, chances are there most likely will be a rematch. But if you look at the division right now, there's really nobody else after Topuria. You have Max Holloway's already lost 3 times to Volkanovski, and he's moving up to 55 in his next fight. Yair Rodriguez just recently lost to Volkanovski. Brian Ortega lost to Volkanovski, also doesn't have a good win in the last 4 years and has been squatting in the rankings forever and also has a fight coming up with Yair Rodriguez. Arnold Allen obviously just lost to Movsar, and they haven't updated these rankings yet, so I'm assuming Movsar will jump up to around the number 4 spot, somewhere around there, or maybe number 5. They'll bump Ilia Topuria up to number 4. Then you have Topuria, who's getting the next title shot. Then you have Josh Emmett, who's coming off a win over Bryce Mitchell, but he's not getting a title shot anytime soon. Then you're getting down to Calvin Kattar, Giga Chikadze. None of these guys are truly deserving. And if Topuria loses to Volkanovski at UFC 298, then what you'll have is you have Movsar Evloev, who I believe is 18-0 now, undefeated, coming off a really solid win over Arnold Allen, a top 5 opponent. And at some point, you just got to start looking at it. Okay, who hasn't fought Volkanovski yet? And, ideally would have been nicer for Movsar to maybe get one more win after this against another top 5 guy, yes. But if you look at the division right now, Movsar's undefeated. He's on a long winning streak. He got a win over a top 5 guy. He looked incredible doing it. And I think if Volkanovski beats Ilia Topuria, I think Volkanovski should probably fight Movsar Evloev next because he's not going up the lightweight. He already has 2 losses against Islam Makhachev. And also, and this is going to sound crazy, if Ilia Topuria beats Alexander Volkanovski decisively, I don't want to see a rematch. So book a fight that was originally supposed to be booked for UFC 270 back when Ngannou took on Gane. Book Ilia Topuria versus Movsar Evloev, because if Topuria becomes champion and he wins decisively, then you can potentially have 2 undefeated guys fighting for the featherweight title in a fight that was supposed to happen 2 years ago at this point. So I would love that matchup. I do believe Movsar Evloev should be next for the title. Obviously, if it's a close fight and Topuria wins, there'll probably be an immediate rematch. Obviously, if Volkanovski's winning and somehow gets KO'd, there'll be an immediate rematch. But if there's no immediate rematch, I want to see Movsar Evloev fight for the featherweight title next, and I think it should be an open and shut case for Movsar Evloev. Moving up to my actual list, starting off with number 3, and that is that the women's bantamweight division is completely dead. Raquel Pennington beat Mayra Bueno Silva to win the women's bantamweight title. This division is dead. This division is like Uncle Rico. It's stuck in 2005. I mean, the division is horrible. It has not evolved. And at this point, I'm ready to abolish the whole women's bantamweight division. It's a crappy division. You're going to have Raquel Pennington versus Juliana Pena next. I mean, if that's a pay-per-view main event, I'm skipping that card. And you guys know I'm not one of these people that perpetually hates on women's MMA. I understand there is some high-level women's MMA. I enjoy the strawweight division. I enjoy the women's flyweight division. Right now, the bantamweight division is one of the ugliest, most low-skill divisions I have ever seen. You have Raquel Pennington as champion, Juliana Pena, then you have Mayra Bueno Silva, Ketlin Vieira, Irene Aldana, Holly Holm, Pannie Kianzad, Yana Santos, Carol Rosa, Macy Chaston. Miesha Tate is ranked number 11 in the division right now. Number 11. She'll be number 10 when Raquel Pennington gets booted up to champion. This division is completely dead. The only way to save it was to have Mayra Bueno Silva win, because at least she's somewhat fun to watch. But she showed that she's not even good. She doesn't have good cardio at all. She went out there and completely shit the bed. She grappled for the first round, won the first round, then kind of gassed out. And both of them had super low fight IQ. But I'm looking at this division. I'm not excited for any of these matchups. I don't want to see any of these matchups. I don't care about any of these matchups. There's not one fight right now in the women's bantamweight division that you could get me excited for. There's not one. I mean, seriously. You could literally pick names out of a hat, and I'm like, oh, that's a crappy early prelim at the bare minimum or the maximum. These are horrible. I mean, this division has not evolved at all. Ronda Rousey, if you took Ronda Rousey from back in the day, who was ahead of her time, was going out there ragdolling these women, the division should be so much better since then. If you took Ronda Rousey, and she has not regressed since then, obviously she's probably regressed in her time off, but if you take her from that moment of time, 2013, 2014, you throw her into the current division, she's easily winning. She's easily winning. I have a feeling maybe Amanda Nunes comes back, because if I'm Amanda Nunes, I'm looking at this division and I'm saying that's easy check after easy check after easy check. She probably just wanted to relinquish the belt, take some time off, spend some time with her young kid and family. But then she's going to be like, you know what? Why not go back and collect these easy checks? I mean, this division is an abomination. It's horrible. I mean, look at it in contrast to the women's flyweight division. You have Alexa Grasso, Valentina Shevchenko, Erin Blanchfield, Mana Fior, Caitlin Chukagian, Jessica Andrade. Okay, now you're starting to get down, but at least you got 5 decent fighters in the women's flyweight division. For the strawweight division, you have Weili Zhang, Carla Esparza, Yan Xiaonan, Tatiana Suarez, Amanda Lemos, Jessica Andrade as well, Verna Janarova, Marina Rodriguez, Mackenzie Dern. You know, and you start to, I mean, they're not the most stacked divisions, but compared to bantamweight is horrible. It's horrific. I don't care about it. Ronda Rousey single-handedly brought women's MMA to the UFC, and her division is dead. It is completely dead since the retirement of Amanda Nunes. And even with Amanda Nunes back, it isn't that compelling of a division. And honestly, I think we're going to end up with Juliana Pena as a champion now. I think Juliana Pena probably beats Raquel Pennington, which she's probably my least favorite fighter on the entire roster, Juliana Pena. So this division is dead. Get rid of the entire division. I don't care about the division at all. And I really, really wish to never, ever, 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 ever see anyone in this top 10 fight ever again in the UFC. Just get rid of the entire division. Moving on to my number 2 takeaway from UFC 297, and that is that the word robbery in the MMA community has been so perverted that it is essentially meaningless now. Every single time a fighter you like loses does not mean that it's a robbery. And I'm just so sick and tired of hearing robbery thrown around. I understand knee-jerk reactions, robbery, robbery, robbery. I've even said it a couple times in fights that aren't necessarily robberies, like a knee-jerk live reaction as I'm watching the card. But when you really think back on it and you look at, different fights that have been called robberies over the years, 99% of the time they are not robberies. I don't understand. Just because the fighter you like loses does not mean that it's a robbery. And what's crazy to me is you have so many Sean Strickland incels claiming a robbery. And keep in mind, live, I thought Sean Strickland won. On rewatch, I thought Dricus Du Plessis should have got his hand raised. But they're claiming robbery because they like the things that Sean Strickland says on the mic. I mean, seriously, you're that biased because Sean Strickland's perceived political beliefs align with yours that you want to scream robbery. And a lot of people know, okay, the second and third round were very close. If you say they were very close and then you say it's a robbery, you were literally contradicting yourself. And a lot of these same people are just saying it because they like Sean Strickland. If it was anyone else, they'd be like, oh no, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine. But because they like Sean Strickland, because they're willing to attach themselves to anyone who appears to have the same political beliefs as them, and Sean Strickland says these controversial things, they're now going to claim robbery on his behalf. And a lot of these people, it's crazy to me. And actually, I may make another video about this. You have a lot of people saying, because there's talk of Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya next, which I believe it will be next. That's not to say it's the most deserving fight next. But you have the same people saying, Adesanya doesn't deserve a title fight, asking for a Sean Strickland immediate rematch. They're saying Adesanya, once he won his title back, he never defended it. He dropped it to Sean Strickland. But let's give Sean Strickland an immediate rematch. Makes absolutely no sense. Anyone who is crying and whining, saying Adesanya doesn't deserve a title fight next, I can agree with you. I can agree with you. But then you better be campaigning for Jared Cannonier. Get Jared Cannonier to get the title shot. Because Jared Cannonier beat Sean Strickland. Jared Cannonier should have got the title shot at UFC 293 over Sean Strickland. So don't cry meritocracy just because your favorite fighter may get screwed over by not having a meritocracy. I'm just so tired of hearing robbery after every close fight. It drives me up a wall. We don't have to scream robbery. We can debate about whether or not Sean Strickland won or Dricus Du Plessis won, and I think it's fair. I don't think it's even crazy to say Sean Strickland won. I think it's very reasonable to think Sean Strickland could have got rounds 1, 5, and then either 2 or 3, whichever one you want to give him. But I also think it's very reasonable to give Dricus Du Plessis the decision as well, and that's what ended up happening. That's what 2 of the judges decided. So to sit here and scream robbery, and I see people saying, oh, they robbed him because they were in Canada. You are delusional. If you think they're paying off the judges because Sean Strickland said controversial stuff and Canada didn't want him as the UFC champion, you probably believe in flat earth as well. So stop using the term robbery. You can say, hey, I thought Sean Strickland won. Stop screaming robbery just because the fighter you like lost a close decision. Dricus Du Plessis is now the middleweight champion. Moving on to my number 1 takeaway from UFC 297. And this is something I kind of already knew, but I really wanted to highlight it in this video because I literally cannot even fathom that this happened. But that is that Dricus Du Plessis is an elite level middleweight. We already knew that after Robert Whittaker. But his style was so deceptive because it's so unorthodox. It appears to be so sloppy. And also add to this number 1 takeaway that the Dricus Du Plessis stamina myth was definitely a myth. There were some questions whether or not Du Plessis had good cardio or not. He had better cardio than Sean Strickland. And I know Sean Strickland won the 5th round, but that's because Du Plessis had the better cardio in the 4th round and really pushed the pace. And then he kind of leveled the playing field going into the 5th round, was even a little bit more gassed than Sean Strickland now because he put a beating on Strickland in the 4th round. So I don't ever want to hear Dricus Du Plessis doesn't have good cardio again. And also, we talk about this all the time. You may not have the most aesthetically pleasing fight style, but at the end of the day, if it's effective and it's effective against elite level fighters, that means you are an elite level fighter. As sloppy as Dricus Du Plessis has looked in the past against Brad Tavares, against others, he went out there, is now undefeated in the UFC, all stoppages but the title fight, and is now the UFC undisputed middleweight champion. This guy is the elite of the elite. This guy has a super high-level skill set. This guy has probably the best heart and determination I've ever seen in the history of the UFC. He has a mentality of he's willing to go out there and die. And because of his willingness to be super aggressive and press forward and eat a shot to land a shot, that is what I believe truly won him this fight. Because he pressed forward on Sean Strickland in close fights where the damage is borderline equal. They have to take into, octagon control and grappling. So the people saying, oh, those takedowns meant nothing, they come into effect in the judging criteria based on, okay, if damage is equal, we have to look at something else. And if Dricus Du Plessis is controlling the octagon, if Dricus Du Plessis is getting takedowns, then we give it to Dricus Du Plessis. So I think his ability to be so mentally strong in the cage and his belief in himself, he went out there and that's truly what won him this fight because he was getting jabbed up in the 1st and 2nd round. And I know he arguably won the 2nd round. I think he won the 2nd round. But to be getting jabbed up, to get his eyes swollen early in the fight, and then continue to fight in the way he did, and then get the 4th round, which is crazy. I could not believe when I was looking at them both in the 4th round, like, Dricus Du Plessis has the better gas tank here. So ultimately, I think Dricus Du Plessis, we already knew he was one of the elite when he stopped Robert Whittaker, but now he's proved, you know, he is championship material, and he has more to prove, of course. But there's a chance, who knows, Dricus Du Plessis could go down as one of the greatest middleweights of all time. I'm not making that claim yet, but all bets are off. He went out there and TKO'd Robert Whittaker. Everyone doubted him going into that fight. Now, I felt like going into the Strickland fight, it was more of like 60-40 for Strickland going into this fight, but people doubted him again. Dricus Du Plessis goes out there, proves the doubters wrong again, and gets it done against Sean Strickland. And I just cannot believe I'm saying this. I was saying like 6 months ago, or really like 8 months ago, before UFC 290, I was saying I think Dricus Du Plessis is a fraud. I don't think he's that good. He's fighting the dead body of Derek Brunson, dead body of Darren Till. But now, to reel off a win against Robert Whittaker, to reel off a win against Sean Strickland, and now most likely he's fighting Israel Adesanya next, I wouldn't count him out against Israel Adesanya. I would not count him out. So imagine that win streak. To be on the, I mean, talk about a depth of a 3-fight win streak. Imagine having Robert Whittaker, Sean Strickland, and Israel Adesanya. That is already building a very substantial resume for Dricus Du Plessis. And I just wanted to highlight that I have been completely wrong about Dricus Du Plessis this entire time. And he is an elite level fighter, no matter what the body language looks like, no matter what the overall kind of style points that he may be able to get in the cage. It looks kind of sloppy. It doesn't matter because it's effective. And also, I wanted to point out, and this really doesn't have to do with my number 1 takeaway. It's crazy to me, and this kind of goes with number 2 when I was talking about Strickland. It's crazy to me how people will act like Sean Strickland's exciting just because they like him because he says outrageous things. That's just crazy to me, because what lost in this fight is kind of being inactive and backing up. And Strickland, even when he fights and he's winning, he's just pressing forward and popping the jab. So it's crazy to me that people act like he made this fight exciting. Dricus Du Plessis made this fight exciting. And to add to the number 1 takeaway, kind of make it like a 3-layer number 1 takeaway, Dricus Du Plessis is one of the most exciting fighters on the UFC roster. He has not been in a boring fight yet, and I look forward to his title reign in the middleweight division. But let me know what you guys think of my takeaways. Are there any takeaways I missed that should have been in this video? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.